got 152 yards. Should be just a nice, comfortable 9-iron for him. They're going to go nuts when he hits this thing.
That's dirt.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome into the Preferred Lines podcast. My name is Joe Idoni. That guy right next to me there is John Hasselbauer, and we are here to provide you a comprehensive, complete, fun preview for the United States Open Championship. Yo, yo, yo. What's up, gang? Welcome to the Gambling Club meeting. John, how we feeling? U.S. Open, you ready, baby?
Best week of the year. I feel like I might have said that in past weeks, getting a little overexcited, but this is objectively, to me, the best week of the year. And I feel that way because obviously Masters, you get very excited. But I feel like US Open is for the golf sickos predominantly because you have to dig into the course. This is where I get the most questions from my friends and casuals. Like, what's the deal with this place? Who are we betting? Augusta comes around every year. Masters, okay, we love it, great. But you kind of know the guys. And even if you're not following it that closely, you're casual sports, but you kind of just know the guys. US Open, I feel like it's our responsibility to really do the research, dig in, be authorities on the course, the history, and all of that. So I've done a lot of research. I know you have too. I'm very excited to hop in. Oakmont is a gem and really like just synonymous with the US Open. It's hosted the most times. When I think of US Open and the test that comes with it, it's everything that you get at Oakmont. So I'm pumped for it, man.
You think of Oakmont, I think of Oakmont. The mystique is a story of its own. We'll get into that briefly in just a couple minutes. Excited to go through it all with you. As always, this show proudly presented to you people free of charge from the good folks over at Rotoballer PGA. The promo code there is scrolling across the bottom of your screen. If you're with us on YouTube, Lines, Lines, 10% off. We would absolutely love to have you for the rest of your season. My top 10 power rankings will be as in-depth as ever this week. I feel like I'm well prepared. I'm ready to take the final exam, ready to post that article. John's Everything You Need to Know About Oakmont Country Club article will be up this week as well. Market Movers piece. Either of us have you absolutely covered, and we're excited that you would join us this evening for Preferred Lines. Thank you as always. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, a like and a subscribe goes a heck of a long way. Leave us a comment. Tell us who you think's going to win the 2025 United States Open Championship. John, Oakmont Country Club, you mentioned it's hosted the most times. This is like the climax of our golf season that we get when we see Oakmont. We think of the punishing, sadistic nature of the scoring that inherently comes with this place in Western PA. It's a beautiful gem, not a single water hazard, not a single tree on the inside of the property, yet this place is an absolute carnage creator.
Yeah, it's kind of like Sandmont or something. There's no oak anymore. They took the oaks out. It's Pewmont, maybe. I love the pews there. And it's really defined by the hazards that if you miss the fairway, if you miss the green, you're kind of dead. And that sort of is reminiscent of what we saw at Winged Foot, but Bryson did the Bryson thing and had it. If you just removed Bryson from the 2020 US Open, then you kind of see a tournament play out like what I think we're going to get here, which is like if you're not superhuman strength overpowering it, then you got to lean on everything in your bag and play perfectly. I don't think Bryson will do the wing foot thing here just because of how much penalty there is with the bunkers is like a new addition. We'll get into all that too. But it's going to be a good test, a fair test, and one that I think sort of opens the door just a tiny bit for the non-bombers relative to a couple of the past US Open. So I'm excited for it.
Well, it's interesting because the yardage definitely does that. And it's not overly difficult because it's 7,800 yards. Let's start let's do this. Let's start from the beginning, John. Let's start with a little history of Oakmont Country Club. Founded by Henry Phones, is I believe how you pronounce the last name. Pennsylvania man, made his extensive wealth in the steel business, like many do around Pittsburgh. Sold his company at a pretty young age and was diagnosed with a life-threatening vascular disease, the hardening of the arteries, which he essentially thought in his mind, this is the end of my life. I'm going to do all the bucket list things I would want to do if I was dying in a few years, which is let's go to Scotland. Let's play as much golf in Ireland as I possibly can. Went and played all the greatest courses in the world, came back to Pittsburgh only to find out when he revisited his doctor, he was misdiagnosed. So now he has this new lease on life. He has this extended longevity. He has all this money and he has this new love for golf. So what's he do? He buys 190 acres of farmland in rural PA and he builds Oakmont Country Club for the sole purpose, I think, of making it the most difficult, hardest, yet fair golf course in the world. When it opened, the fun fact, when this course opened in 1903, it was a par 80. I don't know if you saw that. There were 8 par 5s and a par 6 Oakmont opened with. But in more recent times, it's hosted 2 U.S. Opens since the year 2000. 2007 was the highest scoring average for any tournament of the last 25 years, plus 5.6 over par scoring average. That was when the weather cooperated. That's when we got firm and fast. That's when Angel Cabrera won. And then 2016, of course, Dustin Johnson conquered the squirrel finding its nut at Oakmont Country Club. Much rainier conditions that week, still 3.5 strokes plus over par. That's kind of the historical context and some of the notes I have on Oakmont. Anything you want to share there as well, John?
Yeah, I mean, it may still be a par 80. We may see a lot of plus 10s out there this week. I thought it was interesting too when I don't know what you call this. He was soul searching and thinking he was on his bucket list trip across to Europe.
Yeah.
And he went to St. Andrews and all of the famous links courses. And he fell in love with the game there and he brought a lot of that back here. Which is interesting because I don't think you see a lot of links elements in US Open venues. You know, maybe Chambers Bay you would.
Yeah.
LACC, a tiny bit, very tiny
Maybe
bit
a little
there.
Shinnecock, a little.
Sure. Yeah. But obviously not through the rough that's here are you getting anything linksy, but where you are getting that is those lateral bunkers, which I love about links golf. If you're gonna miss your mark, you're gonna have to punch out. So there's gonna be a lot of these just like advance it because you hit it into a lateral bunker, and it adds a little bit of variance, which I'm sure the players won't love, but it's good for the drama, the 2-shot swings that we love to see too. So yeah, it's an awesome course. We haven't seen it since 2016. It was wet in 2016, which really played perfectly to a guy like a Dustin Johnson, where he has the length, but also the approach play to fire at pins. I think that's the biggest difference here. You're not firing at any pins in a dry Oakmont setting like we're going to see this week. And when it gets softer, you get guys like Jim Furyk, Kevin Na, who can finish in a top 10 because they're just going to lean on the approach play. Not so much the case this week.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a par 70, 7,372 yards. So not an overly daunting total length and yardage of the course. One of the things I've kind of found in going through my notes is you strip away a little bit of like the emphasis on long iron play, which we've seen in so many US Opens and like the Masters, and we just kind of saw it at Quail Hollow, like over 200-yard proximity. That's not the questions that Oakmont asks you. There have been some changes in more recent times. Gil Hanse just completed a restoration project, pretty extensive, removed a lot of the bunkering that was added over the years. So Phone's son notoriously was a really good player, Ryder Cup captain, I think competed and actually finished like 11th in a US Open during his time as an amateur back in the early 1900s. But he kind of, after his father designed the golf course, unbelievable that this is just sort of a one and done design by Henry Phones that's now hosted 11 US Opens, like pretty unbelievable story there. But his son kind of added these bunkers along the way. Gil Hanse removed a ton of those. So at one point, this course had over 300 bunkers on it. There's still a lot. There's like over 170, I believe, but he removed a ton of those, added about 300 yards in length, I see from my notes, making sure, like, really wanted to kind of ensure that the original concept bunkering and dog legs maintain some validity as an actual obstacle on the course and weren't just easily clearable. Added about 25,000 square feet to the greens, which is a massive overhaul. The total footprint now on average of the greens, and they vary pretty vastly in size, but the average square footprint is 8,500 square feet. But what he does and what Hanse is kind of famous for is they can be that big, but they play a lot smaller. He reincorporated a lot of the original slopes. He stripped away the 100-year-old buildups around the greens that had really flattened off all the edges and allowed balls to kind of stay on there that weren't proper shots. Also was able to reintroduce a lot of new pin locations that I think that we'll be able to see this year, which we haven't seen in a U.S. Open in a very long time at Oakmont Country Club. Finally unleashed a little sub-air system, which may be put into use this week. I have a good feeling they want them to run at like a 14 or a 14 and a half. So a lot of stuff, as always, really well done by the Hanse Restoration team. Did you have any notes to add kind of there on some of the work that's most recently been done?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it with all the Hanse Restoration stuff. I think we trust and love everything that Gil Hanse has done. Like, he's got a perfect track record. Everything he touches turns to gold, it seems like. I think it reminds me a lot of the Southern Hills restoration, where they increased the green size. And my initial reaction to that was like, oh, that's going to make it easier. It's going to be more greens in regulation. But really what it did, to your point, was create new pin locations that actually reimagine what you think about the hole. If it's something that has, let's just say, a very severely sloped right to left fairway, and now you're naturally the ball is going to go right to left, but you put a pin on the right side, then all of a sudden that's torture. So that is really exciting to me. I think it increases the importance of like lag putting. Maybe you get a little bit more Texas wedges here, and tightly mown fairways, I think, are also a staple here. So I think what you're going to see is a lot of decision making after this restoration of, especially if you're in the rough, like, do I just bail out into this false front and try to 60-foot putt myself 2 putts to a par, or do I take a risk and go at the pin and risk like trickling into the rough and short-siding yourself on an impossible chip? So it's going to take patience and strategy. It's going to reward guys who have just seen this course a little bit. I don't think it's transformed immensely to the point where playing in 2016 is not relevant anymore. I think there is actually a lot of value in guys who've seen it then, because the greens, largely, like, the slopes to them haven't changed. It's just they've expanded a tiny bit. So overall, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be a modernized version of what we saw in 2016, and it's still going to be a kick in the ass.
Let's talk about some of that strategy and kind of break it into the traditional strokes gain quadrants. Okay. I would say the defining feature of Oakmont is the greens. So let's start there and work our way back to the tee box, if you'll indulge me. I do think there is an advantage to guys seeing these before, because quite frankly, I've talked to people who've played Oakmont. These are the hardest greens to putt in the world. The hardest.
Yeah.
The amount of undulation, the size, the speed, all of them have said it. Over half the field is going to show up this week having never been there, and I guarantee you'll hear in the press conferences that they've never seen anything like it. I was listening to some kind of interesting, as I was doing my research. It was the fried egg, I think, but they talked to the superintendent, Mike McCormick, who mentioned in an interview. So there will be a lot made of the grass, which is a POA grass, but it is a rather unique strain from my understanding. So they actually had a doctor out of Penn State who did an incredible study on POA and how this particular all POA strain will essentially adapt and change throughout its life and manipulate kind of its chromosomes, however you want to put it, to how it grows based on its environment and based on its treatment. Well, now for 125 years, They have cut the greens on this grass as low as humanly possible. They have rolled them to get up to speeds that were unfathomable 50 years ago. And now what you're left with is like this Jurassic Park strain of Western Pennsylvania POA that is barely needs to be mowed. It rolls smoother than you've ever seen, and they're able to get the green speeds up to 14 pretty easily around this place. It's the defining feature. I think the making them bigger doesn't necessarily makes them essentially easier to hit, but I don't know that it makes the course any easier, because having a 75-foot putt at Oakmont Country Club seems as terrorizing as having a 200-yard approach shot in many instances. What do you make of the greens? Have you heard that? Anything to do there with the strain, or what are you looking for from a putting perspective? You mentioned 3-putt avoidance being kind of key in lag putting.
Yeah, I mean, everything is Bermuda base, and the green is POA overseed. The Bermuda POA overlap is something I'm not familiar with. I haven't seen that anywhere. So from a model standpoint, and to be in the Northeast, Bermuda based in general is odd and unusual. Usually if we see POA in the Northeast, it's a POA bent blend like what we're seeing in Canada this week. So this is very unusual, to your point. If you haven't seen it before, it's going to throw you off a little bit. From a model standpoint, I'm not really putting any grass types in my models. I'm just going to do broad putting and not weight it that much, and put more emphasis on very fast greens, because I think that's going to be translatable. And then the approach putting and 3-putt avoidance. That's where we'll get into the short. I'll save my short game takes for quattro number 2, but for putting, yes, it's going to be all about lag putting. I think the name of the game here is really like play conservatively. If you have yourself a 20-foot putt for birdie every hole, you're going to win this tournament. So, so just sometimes you're going to have to bail out and hit some testy like 8-footer par saves this week that you're giving up the hole on all the time. So it's unusual. It does remind me of Winged Foot a little bit in that regard. It reminds me of Oak Hill as well. Major venues that are just kind of like just gargantuan challenges. Those from a putting standpoint, I think those are the 2 courses. I don't know if you have any others that come to mind. But for me, it's Oak Hill and Winged Foot that this reminds me the most of.
I like those both being Northeast comps. Maybe a little bit of Memorial, just because it's more of the bent grass greens there. But I think Midwest, it's not that far from there. Columbus, Ohio, is not that far from Western PA either. So from just sort of that area of the country. But yeah, it's you got to play defense from 25 feet when you're putting here. Like, you're not trying to hold it. And that's what's unusual when you're looking at putting splits. I'm not breaking it down by a particular strain. I want to know kind of very broad spectrum, strokes gained last 50, last 100, how good of a putter you are. But I also like filter in the majors. Like, the majors are the toughest greens to putt. Like, how do you putt at the majors over the last 3 or 4 years? I think that's so much more important than understanding how a guy just most recently putted at the Charles Schwab Challenge or something along those lines. It's just such a different task what people are going to have to do this week. You mentioned some of the short game stuff. Where are you at there? Like, what are we talking? Lush, rough around the green, shortly mown areas? How difficult are the bunkers? How much emphasis are you putting on around the green game for success at Oakmont?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's all of those things, which are in any other venue like an either or type of deal. It's either tightly mown or it's not. There's either a bunch of bunkers or there aren't. I feel like I didn't see a ton of greenside difficult bunkers. Like they're avoidable more so than on the fairways, where like if you're driving, there's bunkers on both sides and you can't avoid them. But hitting into the green, you can bail away from bunkers, but the rough is so lush. It almost is so difficult and such a guessing game that it takes some of the skill out if you miss in the rough. So I'm actually waiting around the green very low for a course where I expect there to be a lot of missed greens, even though the green size is large. If it's playing to a 14 on the stimp, you could hit the green and roll off anyway. So I think you're going to see a lot of just hacking out of thick rough around the green, or bailing out to these false fronts where you can hit like a Texas wedge from. So if you're somebody who's not the best chipper in the world, but you feel better putting and you have great lag putting, I think that's actually a strength you can play into here and bail out away from the rough. Because if you find yourself in the greenside rough, it's a bogey. There's no way to control it. You're just hacking to the middle of the green. No, but the scrambling percentage from the rough this week is going to be like 10%.
It's interesting though, because I also don't think the bunkers are easy. I don't think they're it really, a lot of it depends on the pin location and where the bunker is. Like there's the infamous story about William Phones, the son, who would kind of sit on the porch in the office there at Oakmont and watch play all day. And at the end of the day, he would walk the course with the greenskeeper. And essentially, if he saw a poor shot that a player he felt was not punished properly for, there was a bunker there the next day. So that's kind of how a lot of this evolved. What I noticed in some of my overheads is that while I don't think they're particularly like deep or difficult to get out of, the problem is the magnitude of some of the greens being so huge that you could have a greenside bunker shot and have to hit it 30, 35 yards, which, you know, there's this, like most courses with 5,000, 5,500 square foot greens, you can kind of just flip it out onto the edge of the green and it will roll down to the hole. These, you're going to have to hit these like very difficult, long, like bump and run, chunk and run bunker shots versus having a lot of spin on it, which I don't think is overly easy either. I think, like you mentioned, the around the green stuff is really hit or miss. You can be okay, you cannot be okay, but you really have to be in a utilize proper course management. And it's almost being pin high is important, but also being in a spot where you can utilize the slopes and the topography of the green to your advantage if you miss your approach shot is going to be huge. Because if you're working against this ridge line that kind of runs through the entire course is cantered on a tilt, basically. If you're working against that out of the rough around the greens, you're not going to be able to keep it on the green. So missing on the proper side to be able to utilize those slopes is very important. And I think that comes down to experience here, scouting the course, having a good caddy, and just being someone who is really thinks their way around the golf course versus, you know, just tries to kind of go out there and hit shots. And we know the players that are and aren't at this point pretty well.
Yeah, 100%. And if I was in trouble, like let's say I've drove it in the rough and I'm not confident I can hold the green, I think it would be best to bail out into one of these false fronts or aim for a bunker because at least then you can control the spin. It's just, it's such a guessing game. Like you could hack into greenside rough and it go nowhere, and then you've made a double bogey with one small error, small misfire. So yes, the bunkers are not easy, and there's a lot of them greenside, but it's I would take that over chipping from this rough like 10 times out of 10 too. It almost reminds me of Bethpage in that regard. Like I've played a few rounds at Bethpage where once I've missed the fairway, I'm literally just aiming for bunkers because it's my only hope.
All right, let's talk about the approach play. Quadrant 3, we're working our way back to the tee. Pretty narrow fairway. So assuming that you're in the short grass, they're harder to hit in terms of the fairways because they're, like I mentioned, they're kind of on that slope and you're working with it. So if it's 18 to 20 yards wide, it's effectively shorter than that based on the ridge line. It's going to keep balls in the rough. It's going to push ones on the wrong side of the fairway into the rough. And the thing is like, you're not hitting a ton of long irons, like I mentioned earlier. Like I watched Bryson put out a video. I don't know if you saw it, but he played all 18 at Oakmont. I went through and counted his shots. He hit 6 50-degree wedges, a pitching wedge, 2 9-irons. Now that's Bryson. But what I guess my point being is that you don't have a lot of like 4, 5, 6 irons in here. That's not what makes the approach play difficult, is the distance. And it's really not so much about the target either. Instead, what it is for me is that you're never hitting off an even lie. Yes. You're almost always on a down slope, uphill. Most of the time, it's some sort of side slope where the ball is sitting above your feet or below your feet, which what that does, I think, is just gets in players' heads. And you're not so much thinking about the target. You're not thinking about where the ball is going to finish. Your mind is focused on where the ball's starting, right? On most courses where it's flat, all you're looking at is where is the ball going to finish. Here you have to pay such close attention and focus on where it's starting, above your feet, below your feet, how it's going to react, that it makes that approach shot much more difficult. but I think I'm focusing, on 175 yards and in on approach play, especially with the par fives that you're going to hit wedges to as well. Where are you at on the importance of approach play, and kind of how have you dissected that?
Yeah, I think it's such a the topic of like what does approach mean at Oakmont is such a compelling topic because it's so nuanced. I watched the Bryson video. I watched DJ's whole tournament in
Did you?
2016.
Did you
DJ
hit
had
a lot of
100
wedges
in.
too?
Yeah, he had 100
Okay.
in from the fairway on it seemed like every other hole, and he wasn't like hitting every green or like giving himself birdie opportunities because you're scared to go deep if the pin's in the back, and you're scared to leave it short if the pin's up and it rolls back on a false front. So the job's not done if you hit a perfect drive down the middle. To your point, it's almost like there's everything. This course throws everything at you except approaches from like, let's say 175 to 225, which is so unusual for definitely a US Open venue, but really just like any venue that we see. I mean, you look at the Canadian Open at TPC Toronto in the week prior, and it's similar yardage as a par 70, and it's almost all 200-yard shots or 175
Correct.
200 shots. So the way that this is routed is on the extremes. The par fives are 630 each. The par threes, you have one that's 300 yards, and then you have two pseudo drivable, one definitely drivable par four, one pseudo drivable one for bombers, where you're not even hitting irons on any of those holes, right? It's just driver wedge or driver putter.
Driver chipping,
or a 3-wood into that 290-yard par three. So, and those are your scoring opportunities. So if you can make par on your 400 to 450-yard par fours, which there are many, and then you can scramble for birdie, I think that's how this tournament is going to be won: scrambling for birdie on the drivable fours and the drivable fives, and treading water everywhere else. All that to say, I'm probably going to weight strokes gained approach very low in a model, maybe the lowest of any event this year. One, because of what you mentioned with the undulations being so unique here, and it's not a TrackMan flat lie where you're just, okay, I'm going to hit my 150 shot. There's so much more to it. The strokes gained approach over the last 36 rounds is not going to be indicative of the actual approach shot you have to hit here. You might want to look at approach play at Augusta and Kapalua. But even then, it's not 1-to-1. I don't love that either. Muirfield Village, like you mentioned, I think that's a good proxy as well for some of these undulations into greens like this. But there's not a perfect example. So I would weight strokes gained approach much lower this week and look at that kind of wedge play. Because if you're on these 400-yard holes and you hit it close, then if you had a good drive on a 400-yard hole, then you have a wedge in your hand. You have a scoring club. So yeah, it's tricky. It's nuanced. There's a lot you could say about approach, but in layman's terms, I would just say I'm doing everything but approach. I'm looking at proximity buckets. I'm looking at comps. I'm looking at strokes gained approach from the rough, which you can do in BetSperts in the rabbit hole too. So yeah, whole lot to consider.
All right, so here's where we're at. We've said that putting is hard to quantify here because it's unlike putting anywhere else. There's really nowhere that you can compare the putting to. It's going to be so difficult. You're underweighting around the green play. You're underweighting approach play. So how important is off the tee play? Is that where the most of your model is kind of concentrated on for you, John?
Yeah. Yes. It's not. And I was almost like, is this Philly Cricket Club because it's par 70 and a classical design and a big green and a nuanced green? But that is such a second shot course and generous off the tee that I'm not really looking at that too much. I think it really begins off the tee. And if you're not above average in driving distance and above average in accuracy, you're going to really struggle here. I actually would weight accuracy a little bit higher than distance, because being able to say, I can't miss on this side where that bunker is, I'm not going to do that. And being able to execute that is very important here. I'm not going to cross Colin Morikawa off the list or Russell Henley off the list because they're not long. I do think they're at a disadvantage on the holes that we talked about, the scoring holes of a drivable 4, specifically the second hole where it's like 350 and it's not drivable for most, but for Bryson and Rory and, 20 players in this field, maybe it is, you are going to be at a disadvantage there because they're going to be chipping for birdie, trying to get up and down for birdie in that sense. The 630-yard par fives are going to be interesting as well because that's not meant to be reachable in 2, but there's a couple guys in this field that are going to be able to. Can you survive that if you're below average in driving distance and you're playing it as a 3-shot hole? We'll see. Some guys will. Some guys will be able to do it and hit to their number and find a birdie there, or just play those even and find their birdies elsewhere. But I do think that's where the distance advantage comes in. And that for those 4 holes specifically. And then for the other 14 holes, I think it's a pretty even playing field. If you can live out of the fairway and hit 80% of the fairways this week, which is a tall order, but if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of distance and you can do that, then that's huge. So yes, I'm weighting total driving, driving distance, driving accuracy, driving on courses where it's difficult to hit the fairway, high missed fairway penalty driving. All of those things are very highly weighted in my model. I'm skirting around, approach around the green. I'm heavy on putting on fast conditions, 3-putt avoidance, approach putting, and then all the comp stuff. So how are you doing in majors and how are you doing on comp courses in general?
Yep. So here's my, I guess, take off the tee. I want to handle it sort of separately. I think from a DraftKings or a matchup or a top 20 betting perspective, I'm okay with a lot of the shorter hitters. I think there's an advantage to distance and carry distance, but I don't think it's so disproportionate here that the shorter hitters can't compete because there is such an advantage from playing from the fairway. Now, when it comes to outright betting, I'm weighing, like, if I'm going to try to find the winner, it's going to be a guy who bombs it because listen, there's first of all, like 3 of the 4 of them are like some of the best players in the world. So it's kind of an easy take. But second of all, one of them's going to get it right and feel good with the driver this week and hit as many fairways as Colin Morikawa or 1 less per round. And that advantage of power is going to allow them and open up scoring opportunities, like you said, on 4, maybe 6 of the holes. One of those par 5s, I think, played 680 in the last US Open when they moved the tee back. So one of the power guys is going to get it right, and it's going to come back to the fact that he can carry it 325, 330 on command when needed to, because the issue is when Russell Henley misses a fairway, he's going to miss them. They're 20 yards wide. They're on a tilt. When Sepp Straka misses a fairway, it's going to be very tough for them. Like, they may have to lay up on some of these holes, like on some of the par 4s, just because the rough is going to be so thick that you can't get a 4-iron on it. So they're going to have to hit like 7-iron and try to run one up the green. And they may just end up saying, I'm going to play 30 yards short of the green and take my chances of not being in the rough again and try to get it up and down. That's where the advantage comes into play. And that's where these shorter hitters, when they do miss and they only hit it 275, 280, and it plugs in the rough either way, are they still going to be able to make effective shots that are receptive into these greens? So I think on the whole, I'm kind of handling it in 2 different sections. For this show in particular, we're focusing mostly on outright betting. I'm factoring in power and carry distance pretty heavily.
Yeah, I'm 100% approaching it exactly the same way. I think there's an extra tier where if you're a bomber and you have your stuff with you this week and you're hitting more fairways than usual, then you have unlocked scoring opportunities that other people do not have access to. And those are the people that I want access to on an outright card. Let me ask you this: on a matchup for like a full tournament, do you like, let's say, Wyndham Clark versus Brian Harman, similar form? Wyndham Clark's going to be all over the place, but has distance. And Brian Harman's going to be in the fairway and lean on his putting maybe a little bit more. Who do you like better on a course like this?
Yeah, it's interesting. It probably comes down to the 2 players. I don't think in that type of matchup there's any disadvantage to Brian Harman. I think that Wyndham's wild right now. So with those 2 players in particular, I think the safer play with a higher floor is probably Brian Harman. Now, who's more likely to randomly like pop up and win this event? I think Wyndham Clark, because he's the prototypical US Open bomber athlete that we've seen, like DJ, Bryson, Brooks, Rahm. These are the guys who win US Opens. Big, strong dudes. But yeah, I think for in the matchup perspective, I would probably lean Harmon just because he's showing a little bit more form lately, and I'll take his stuff coming from the short grass.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that Wyndham won his major at LACC where you could get away with spraying it a little bit. And I don't think anybody expects you to be able to spray it here and survive. So.
No, you can't. Well, here's the guys that I'm expecting to play pretty well because they are the top 10 guys in my BetSperts stat model, specifically created and optimized for Oakmont Country Club. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the Oakmont Optimizer. This data is available for any of you to see the entire model over on betsperts.com. You can see my model, you can see John's, which will be up later this week, any of the contributors that they have over there. All of our models are completely available to anyone who uses it, and you can also build your own. No surprise, Scotty Scheffler, number 1, Rory 2, Xander, Rahm, Bryson. Rounding out the top 5, you have Fleetwood, Morikawa, Keegan Bradley, Patrick Cantlay, Russell Henley. So here's an example of like something you can do. So I broke off the tee into 3 sections. 21% is a pretty heavy weight for off the tee in a model. So I wanted to look at last 36 rounds in general. You see here, this is where you see Xander Schauffele really struggling, 79th in the field last 36 rounds, not had it cooking with the driver, but he's 4th in strokes gained off the tee in major championships. So these are the last 36 rounds for majors. Xander jumps all the way up. Last 36 off the tee on courses with really long, difficult rough. So you can kind of really segment things like that. I did it similar on approach. I looked at the last 30. I looked at courses with high missed fairway penalty, but you can do all that and like so much more, like around the green. How are guys chipping at the major championships? It's a lot different than what you may see chipping around the greens outside of major championships. Scotty, number 1, Jason Day, Cameron Smith, Patrick Reed. These are the guys who get it done on the most difficult greens, on the most difficult conditions, consistently time after time. And then you see I got carry distance there thrown in at the end. Pretty predictable stat model for this week. No real surprises there, which usually makes me think I probably did a pretty decent job.
Yeah, no, there should not be surprises in a US Open stat model. Because right, like you said, it's difficult conditions. Usually if it's like bomber course, difficult conditions, it's usually like the top 10 OWGR players are the top 10 in the model. So that all checks out. I think Xander, very eye-opening in the model that you just pulled up. Like that was a guy I've talked about in the past few weeks. Like I'm circling the drain on that. I'm leaning there, and then I'm not there. Like he's not perfect off the tee, and that's a strike through for me, even though historically he's always there in US Opens. I'm not saying he won't be again. But he hasn't gained in accuracy. I was looking, he's gained in 1 tournament this season. He's gained in accuracy off the tee. That is not going to cut it here. So I haven't finished up my model yet, but I have a feeling it's going to look a lot like yours.
Xander might miss this cut. I'm going to be honest with you. There's a little. All right, let's bet the board. Let's talk some guys. All right, here we go. US Open betting board. This is Saturday night, June 7th, 9 p.m. Recently updated. I try to take some of the better numbers that I've seen out there, but also the common numbers. I didn't want to grab just outliers. Scotty Scheffler plus 275 outright implies roughly a 25% chance that the sportsbooks believe that Scotty Scheffler is going to win this tournament. A prohibitive favorite. Now, number 2 is where it gets interesting because these recently flipped as of like 2 days ago. I don't know if this is completely reactionary based on some of the stuff we've seen up at TPC Toronto and the eject early plane flight out for Rory McIlroy, but Bryson DeChambeau is now the second favorite on the odds board. Best current number available is 9-1. I don't think that's going to be around much longer for anyone checking this show out earlier. Rory right behind him at 10-1. And then Jon Rahm rounds out the big 4 after popping back onto the scene at Quail Hollow. John, what are your thoughts on the top of the board? Let's start with Scotty. How does this is a weird question. How does Scotty not win this tournament? What are the recipe and the ingredients that need to be thrown into the mixing bowl for Scotty Scheffler not to win?
Yeah, I think it's important that we spend some time on Scotty because you and I betting outright minds are quick to be like, well, I'm not going to bet the 275 guy and move
Yeah.
on. But you have
Right.
to decide if you're going to do it without Scotty Scheffler market or not. I'm not going to do that in a major because that's just not fun. Although the odds really don't change that much. We've seen if you go to the without Scotty market, I might make that recommendation to some friends this week. You know, if you want to do a 275 bet on Scotty, I might show you an alternative prop that I like that's 275 so that you can bet some outrights too. But yeah, let's talk about Scotty. So what does this course do that's in Scotty's favor? You have to play from the fairway, hit it long and straight. He's the best in the world at doing that. His approach play is better than everybody else's from all ranges, really. And he's not going to put the ball in the place that you can't miss at. He's a good course strategist, the best. I shouldn't say good. That's underselling it. He's the best course strategist in the game,
Yes.
maybe ever. So if you need to hit it, if the hole calls for being 30 feet away from the pin, he's going to hit it 30 feet away from the pin. He's not going to get over aggressive. It's perfect for him in that regard. Where you might lose the Scotty luster here is, I think, around the green is a bit of a crapshoot. I think if you miss a green or if you hit a good shot on a very firm green that's not rewarded, it trickles into the rough. You add some randomness there. It's not like Augusta where there's skill in chipping off of tight lies. There is that if you want to bail out that way. But if you're in this rough, it takes that skill away. And I think that's one of Scotty's secret weapons is he can chip in a couple of times around, or he can bail himself out consistently with predictable lies. You're not going to get that in this rough. So that's something to consider. And I don't consider like lag putting to be one of Scotty's super strengths. So I think that could be maybe a little bit exposed here if you're looking for a reason to talk yourself off of Scotty Scheffler. Last thing I would add too, his track record in links golf is not as great as it is everywhere else. And there are those components and influences here with the lateral bunkers. He could hit some great drives that just miss and trickle into a lateral bunker and lose some strokes that way where you're not used to seeing Scotty lose strokes. So that is the case against Scotty. Yes, I'm terrified of him. Yes, it sets up better for him than anybody else in this field. And he's a deserving favorite. I don't think those odds are too short. It's crazy to say. I hope he doesn't win, but I'm very scared of him.
I think they're too short. I'm going to say it. You could run this back on hot, cold takes exposed or whatever it is, but I don't think he's going to win. I think it's a lot. I think if he was 6-1, I may feel differently. Not that that changes like anything, but I don't think the value is built into him. Here's what I think. Can this place piss Scotty Scheffler off? Because he can get very frustrated at times. And it's not so much if the course is hard, it will frustrate Scotty Scheffler. What I've noticed is if he feels like the course is unfair, he hates that. He hates if it's unfair. He hates if his 2-yard miss isn't better than Bryson's 25-yard miss. Hates that. This course may piss him off because like there's so many aspects of the unpredictability nature. Now it does not have pot bunkers. It doesn't have random spots of wiregrass where you're fucked like at Pinehurst, but it does have this rough where it can be playable and it can be not. It's a little bit of a crapshoot. His iron play is on another planet. His course management skills, like you mentioned, are so unheralded because they're so far and away and above anyone else. It's not even close. But he's missing some drives left, which is trouble here. And from everything that I've heard from people who've played it is the way that Oakmont sits, it's this wide open property, right? With no trees. And everything is kind of working around these sort of two sections on each side of the turnpike where the holes are not up and back, but they all kind of have this routing around each other with these space in between, whether it's the church pew bunkers or whether it's this stretch of rough. Well, you're going to let 125,000 people in there. Where are you going to put them? You're going to line the holes. If you miss by 2 yards, and it trickles into the rough, it very well could be worse than 25 yards in the rough. And I think we saw some of that with DJ. If you watch that final round, I picked up on that a few times where he had these big misses. And if you can hit it into the crowd, you're kind of better off playing from there because you're not going to be obstructed by trees. There's no bunkers over there. There's nothing in your way where if you can get the grass trampled down a little bit, it's not the worst case scenario. And I can just envision a situation in my head where that may irk Scotty a little bit and put him potentially a little bit more on tilt than he would be at the Memorial or almost any other tournament where, he's shown this ability where once he figures a place out, it's over, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we've absolutely seen that. That reminds me of the U.S. Open at Torrey Pines, where guys just gave up. They were like, okay, if I go for these fairways and I just miss it, I'm dead. I'm going to aim for the giant galleries. I have a better angle in anyway. So you're totally right. I did kind of notice that too with DJ. And Bryson will not take him long to capitalize on noticing something like that too. So totally hear you on that. And look, I'm good. Talk me into any reason not to be scared of Scotty Scheffler. I'm taking it and running with it.
If I could grant you, let's say you were a decent like scratch player, John. You're a good player, not quite scratch. I've played with you, but let's say I could give you a superpower to have at Oakmont, right? It's like a creative character in PGA Tour 2K. And I said, okay, you can go to Oakmont, John, and I will give you Bryson DeChambeau's driver. And you can hit that everywhere at Oakmont and you will have his exact thing. Or I'll give you Scotty Scheffler's iron play. Which would you take?
I would take what Brian Harmon did when he won the Open. But I'm picking between just 2 putt from literally everywhere on the property.
Give you that.
But if I was picking between those two things, that's tough because it's a function of how many fairways you miss if you're Scheffler, because if you're in the rough, the approach play means nothing. And if you're in the fairway, I think I would still lean Scotty and the approach play. Yeah, I think I would still lean there, even though, like we all talked about, like brute strength goes a long way here, but elite iron play unlocks a couple more scoring opportunities here where you can actually afford to go at a pin or two when it makes sense to. And otherwise you're just playing so defensively the entire round, just trying to shoot par for the round. So elite iron play, I think, gets you a couple more birdies where others may not find them.
I think that's the right call. I just wanted to give you the question. I'm not betting Rory right now. It's switching drivers, QI35 testing, no chance. I don't know. I kind of like John Rahm, but 5 points more than Bryson. I feel like that gap should be bigger. I'm taking DeChambeau. I think it's 1 and 2. I think that he's closer to Scheffler than we believe. I took him at Quail Hollow. I was wrong there. I wasn't very wrong there. Look, he's not outworked. He's not outworked by anybody. As much as Scotty is the ultimate course strategist and better at Bryson at it, Bryson obsesses over it. And he's been there, and I think his major championship prep is something that he has completely figured out at this point how to do better than almost anybody. And people I think would point to like some of the off the course stuff that he's doing and the helicopters and the White House green and YouTube video. But I think that he's challenging himself even in the YouTube videos. He's putting himself in pressure situations. It's not a normal practice round. He's going out there and playing it and filming it for 2 million subscribers. It's more people that watch Live or watching Bryson play Oakmont on YouTube. And the thing about Bryson is he really fully embraces, I think, the difficulty of a U.S. Open. It's almost like, he's always been this student of the game, right?
Yep.
From figuring out swing mechanics to how to leverage speed training to getting bigger to these different ideas with the putting stroke and trying to just gamify how to get better at golf. Well, any student of the game, the ultimate final test and exam is a U.S. Open. And I think that he knows that he's outstudied every player in the field in terms of golf swing. He outworks just about any of them on the range, and he cares so much that it gives him an inherent advantage in U.S. Opens. He's also like not only the best driver of the ball in the field, he's also really good around the greens and putting right now, especially in major championships in the most difficult conditions. His last 6 majors, he's averaging plus 3.5 around the green, plus 2.1 putting in the last 6 majors. Gained putting in 5 out of 6, gained around the green in 5 out of 6. He's averaging 5.5 strokes gained with his short game over the last 5 majors. You give me that driver, you give me enough 50-degree wedges and a guy who's going to gain 5.5 strokes in a short game, I think he's going to win. 9-1 DeChambeau is on my card. I have to stack everything else against that one bit because I'm so heavily weighted and look further down the board. But that's where I'm putting my money.
Yeah, no, it all makes sense. And obviously him being the only one with a 48-minute YouTube video of him playing the course makes it a pretty tantalizing bet too, because he shot even and made a ton of birdies and introduced us all to this course and how it's been playing a week out from the event. It was playing at a 10 stimp in much different conditions than what we'll see this week. But I think that made it a little bit different than what we'll see next week. Doesn't change the fact that he suits the course extremely well. I think history has also probably forgotten since 2020 that it was actually the short game that won Winged Foot for Bryson. It was a master class of short game. Nobody figured out those greens quicker than Bryson did, and he scrambled from absolutely everywhere. The irons were not even that good, but he bombed it and he scrambled his way to victory. And I think that's kind of the approach it's going to take here. So I am either betting Bryson with you, or I'm doing what I did last year unsuccessfully at Pinehurst and putting together like a 10-man card of everybody 40 to 80 to 1.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 drivers. Watch the whole Bryson YouTube video. He had 12 drivers at Oakmont, and that was only because 2 holes he was able to drive the green with 3-wood.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
he's just hitting driver everywhere. We know his strategy. I think that pretty much unveiled it. I tracked him for 6 50-degree wedges, a pitching wedge, and 2 9-irons. He knows that it's driver wedge. He's going to turn this place into driver wedge, man, and he can get screwed by the rough, but I think anybody can get screwed by the rough, but he's going to be hitting wedge out of the rough in 50-degree versus guys who are going to be hitting 8, 7, maybe 6 iron. The guys who are further back. I love his tenacity. I love his mindset approaching weeks like this where he understands that even par is a pretty damn good score. Where are you at with John Rahm? You interested? Not interested?
I'm just out.
Okay.
I think, like you said about the Scheffler frustration thing, I think that could really eat away at Rahm in a course like this, just hitting really good shots that don't go rewarded. That's kind of what the experience was at Augusta earlier this year. I know he's been great ever since that. But you just saw the round kind of get away from him early, and that can definitely happen here. And if it happens again, he's not the course strategist that Scheffler is, where if he gets down, he's going to stick to his game plan. Like he presses quite a bit. He did that at Quail too. When he finished like 5 over on his last 4 holes because he just kept pressing. So that would worry me a bit. If he gets out to a hot start, he's going to be certainly a factor in this, but I don't like the number. And if I don't go, I like Bryson so much more than I like Rahm here for, not too many points less.
Yeah. What's weird to me, what's kind of strange to me is that Bryson's betting price went up from Quail. He's defending U.S. Open champion also. His betting price is better. Rahm's went down based on his performance at Quail only because he's been terrible the previous 5 majors. Has not been good. I think there was one Open championship, maybe the Harmon year where he backdoored something like a third. Has not been good in majors. Rahm's number goes down. Bryson's number goes up. Bryson outplayed him at Quail by a good margin. So it's like the one guy played better than his best performance at a major. Bryson still outplayed him. I think that he's the play there. Getting up into this next range is where things get interesting. The outlier here, like the one that doesn't fit in is Xander Schauffele at 20-1. It's like I didn't want to put him on that first board, right? Because it's like it felt like the big four. Do I put Xander in there? It didn't feel right. But he also doesn't feel right on this list either to me.
Yeah.
Xander's 20-1. Ludwig and Colin Morikawa 25-1. I think that Oberg number is going to float if it hasn't already, by the way. JT, Joaquin Niemann, Tommy Fleetwood, Shane Lowry, who was the leader, I believe 54-hole leader in 2017 at this event at 40-1. Patrick Cantlay, 45. Hovland, Straka, Spieth in the 50s, John. If you aren't going up top, which one of these names would you be most interested in?
Yeah, I think I'm officially out on Xander, which is disappointing because I was trying to talk myself into it, but maybe that's a good thing. When I'm trying to talk myself into something and I find a reason to get out and I'm out.
Right.
Ludwig has looked pretty good in Toronto, not good enough for me to hop on. I think if
scene with the quad there.
Yes, if this was the 2024 US Open and you put if you put Oakmont where Pinehurst was on the schedule, I would be obsessed with Ludwig. Last year, he was in great form. Like that would be the time, but the form is not there. So I'm out on Ludwig. Morikawa, I still don't love the caddy change. I think there's like a little bit of like second guessing, and they have to get into cahoots a little bit better. In theory, I do like Colin, but we're not really getting a discount for what I think we should on a course where like he's not an obvious fit. He hasn't won a US Open. He has played extremely well. Better than I think anyone would expect him to. But yeah, he's just not winning.
Not winning.
Yeah. So there's things I like about Colin. I think in DFS you could definitely talk me in to building lineups around him because I think he's going to play out of the fairway, and I think his approach play unlocks some scoring opportunities. I don't think he's the best chipper in the world, but I don't think that hurts him here. So there's a lot that I like about Colin, but I'm not going to bet him. And then this 40, the 40 to 50 range is really interesting to me. I could talk myself into JT. He's having a good year, maybe a little erratic, but I like the whole like hit creative shots off of undulated fairways, get comfortable with being a little crafty. You have to be creative around here. So I like JT. I thought I was going to like Neiman coming into this. I'm okay with it. I don't love 40, but he just showed that he can like sort of backdoor top 15 in a major. So he's not off the list. I don't like Tommy here. His US Open numbers aren't great. Lowry, sure, it's not for me, but I can understand it. He should have won here in 2016, had an awful Sunday, was in pole position and just kind of folded. But like all these years later, I don't doubt that the exact same situation wouldn't happen if he had a big lead coming into Sunday. So kind of still out on Lowry, but I guess I would understand if people are going to bet him this week. And then that kind of led me to Cantlay and Hovland, which I feel like every major I talk myself into Cantlay and Hovland. And the two best, would we say, consensus best players in the world without a major? Maybe you put Ludwig up there, but I think it's basically these two in their own class.
I think, I would say probably Hovland. Yeah. Hovland, Aberg, Cantlay, Fleetwood would be my four.
Yeah. And maybe, Neiman probably deserves at some point he'll be there, but Hovland may be the guy that I write a lot about this week in my preview because of everything that we were talking about. He's very good ball striking, very consistent and underrated this year because he hasn't been really in contention. But it's been the short game and specifically the chipping as it always is for him. But he's been so consistent on approach. He's gaining off the tee and with accuracy. He has won already this year. He's gotten continually better since then at Valspar. The chipping, I don't think hurts him. He always chips well in majors in the thick rough. It doesn't really make sense to me, but you look at his numbers. His short game is fantastic in majors, and he's a fantastic lag putter. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know whenever you put him on large greens, just watching him play, like he doesn't make mistakes on the greens. I think it's a fantastic number for Hovland to be all the way back at 60 in good form. His major history is great. He was in the mix at Oak Hill. That was one of the closest times he came to winning. And this course reminds me a lot of Oak Hill in many ways. I think it's a great bet. And I think I can definitely squeeze a Hovland and Bryson card together if I go that route. There's things I like about Cantlay too, but I've talked for a while. So I will stop there and just say, like, there's so many things I like about Hovland the most in this range.
Yeah, I'll take the Cantlay side there. I would probably prefer him. I don't know if I'm going to pair him here or kind of just go heavier on Bryson, because part of me is like, I think about these guys in this range, and it's kind of like temptation with these betting prices when you see the 40 to 45s. But then I circle back because I'm like on that top page, and I'm like, are any of these guys going to be able to outlast an A- game from any of those 4 players on the first board? And I'm like, no. Any of those players bring a good quality performance, they're going to win. I think I give the advantage to Cantlay, and it's not a statistical thing, although I do think his baseline performance improves on harder settings. Particularly his putting and chipping go up a little bit when you factor in some of the major championships or really lightning fast green. I have him the 12th best putter in the field on really fast greens. Approach play has been really solid lately. Off the tee is getting incrementally better. And I just think that he can strategize and plot his way around this golf course, is more equipped to do that maybe than Victor Hovland is. I think of Patrick as more of a calculated player in terms of weighing, okay, what's the probability I miss this shot left or miss this shot right? And then what are the probabilities of me getting either of them up and down? Let's avoid the big miss. Versus I think Victor probably is more just free wheels it and is like, which may be a good thing, actually, if you get it right. But I trust Cantlay's strategy, which I think is going to be super important this week. Course management, like you mentioned. Joe LaCava, experienced caddy on the bag, who's won major championships, who's been there at Oakmont before. I think all of that stuff I put into the sort of bin of reasons that I probably favor Patrick Cantlay. And a lot of these other guys, like, I don't see them being able to manage the course properly and avoid mistakes and not get overly frustrated. I don't see that with Ludwig. I don't see that with Justin Thomas, Spieth, even Tommy to a degree. Like, when things go wrong, and things are going to go horribly wrong for a lot of these players, you're going to make double. You're going to have to scramble to avoid triple at some point. You can't let it spiral and affect you and tank around and shoot 79 and you're out of the US Open. So a lot of these guys are temptresses, but I think I may just avoid all of them as I've done so far.
Yeah, probably a pretty profitable strategy, avoiding all these 40 plus guys in majors. Save JT. You're not. Yeah, everybody else is there for a
It's
reason.
been a dead range for like a year and a half, like 30 to 40. And I lived in this range for 6 years.
It definitely is. I'm looking back at past US Open majors, the last 6 winners, 3 of them you get Wyndham, Matt Fitzpatrick, and Gary Woodland. Wyndham and Woodland were like 80 plus. Fitz must have been like 45, 50 that week.
Yeah.
So maybe you'd be looking for that version this year. But I say that just because, like, the US Open is meant to reward the best players. It should reward somebody on that first page. But it hasn't always been the case. So there is some value in digging deeper.
Page number 3, Brooks Koepka, 60 to 1. Not, John, I'm saying this, you have to hold me to it, not betting Brooks Koepka.
Yep.
No interest. Yep. We're out. 60
no interest at all, though.
No interest. Nope. Okay. Can't be talked into it. I have to just ignore it. I'm going to ignore it. We're not going to talk about it again. Ben Griffin, 65 to 1. Hideki, 65. Tyrrell Hatton, 65 to 1. 75, you have Corey Connors, Russell Henley. 80 to 1, you get Patty Reed. 85, Tony Finau, 90 to 1. U.S. Open champion, which I don't know how I almost deleted that from my brain that he won a U.S. Open, but Matt Fitzpatrick, Sam Burns, Daniel Berger, Bobby Robert McIntyre at 90 to 1. Any of these guys you got interest in, John?
Like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was trying to talk myself into Brooks, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to try to do it. I'm not going to force it. So I'm out on him. I'm probably not going to bet any of these guys, but Connors is interesting to me at 75. It's been enough repeat top 10, top 15s in majors where we have to just respect it at a certain point. And he was in the mix at Oak Hill as well. That was, I think, his closest to winning a major. And again, I keep circling back to Oak Hill. I know that was longer than this, but there's a lot that I think bear in common between the two. And he's a guy similar to Cantlay, maybe like a discounted version of Cantlay that's just going to pound fairways and greens. That's not really so easy to say and do at this course. But if anybody's going to take that approach in this range, I feel best about him because even Henley has that they're always neck and neck, priced next to each other, play well at the same courses. But Connor's form is much better than Henley's. So maybe that's a matchup that presents itself. I would definitely lean Connor's 1v1 over Henley.
Yeah, same here. I think so. Henley's kind of gotten loose off the tee randomly out of nowhere. He's not hitting as many fairways anymore. And like I mentioned at the midpoint of the show, you're missing fairways and you're that short, you're toast. The one guy I kind of wanted to like Sam Burns here, and I thought about betting him. I feel like it's coming. The short game stuff has been spectacular. The number one putter in the field on fast greens that I have. I was kind of hoping to see some more semblance because I've watched a lot of the Canadian Open and they've shown him hit a couple of these high draw iron shots where I haven't seen him hit shots like this in a long time. So I was hoping the strokes gain data would bear that out and I'm not just seeing a highlight. Not necessarily the case. He is 45th in strokes gained approach, 5th and around the green. So he's doing it all in familiar fashion of kind of what we would expect. I don't know. Any thoughts on Burns? Where are you at with that?
We are Bermuda based through and through, although it will look and feel nothing like the Bermuda that Burns is used to dominating on.
Top 10 last year at Pinehurst at the US Open.
Yeah.
I think the Fitz year, he had a really good one. He was like up at the top through like 2 rounds of the leaderboard there. Notoriously a guy who you kind of can red line in major championships. It's tough with a lot of these guys. I don't see a great fit. I see some natural like line value in Hideki more than anyone, but the form just isn't checking enough boxes there for me. I'm more inclined, John, to kind of like dip into this next range down the board at 100-1 guys. I've got a couple of them that I like. McNeely, Bradley, Siwoo, Harry English, Aaron Rai, Justin Rose are all 100-1. Minwoo Lee, Jason Day, Wyndham Clark, Sungjae Im, Akshay Bhatia, Davis Thompson at 125. All I think in the mix there. I've got 2 of them here. I took Keegan Bradley, number 1. I think he's been underratedly solid. I trust him in the Midwest, Northeast on these type of greens. I think that he has plenty of US Open experience. I don't think that he's at such a severe disadvantage in terms of power that he can't compete here any longer. A little bit worried about some of the lag putting stuff for him, but I just feel like he's undervalued in general. Strokes gained approach, he's 8th in the field. He's 15th on long, difficult golf courses with long rough. Playing himself like into contention more often than not. And then the other one I like is Harris English. In a weird spot for Harris English. It's interesting that I mentioned these 2 names because Harris English is I think got some big things on his agenda maybe coming up in September that he probably really wants to prepare for and show some love to Mr. Bradley. But Harris English has been great at US Opens. He's been good across all majors. I have him in terms of short game in the majors, the last 36 rounds, number 1 in the entire field in terms of chipping and putting in major championships. He's played well at Winged Foot. I can't tell you you watched the Bryson video. How many times did he say the words Winged Foot in that video?
Yeah.
When he was playing around Oakmont? Like, I think instantaneously all players will see that comp when they get there. I think you're going to see it a lot on TV because of the magnitude of the rough. And it's a guy who I think plays from the fairway a lot, understands the challenge, is so even keeled that he's not going to get flustered by the bad breaks that the US Open brings. And that's why I think that he's had a lot of success at them over the years. So I went English Bradley. Anyone on this list, John, that you like, or what do you think about those two picks?
Yeah, I'm with you on English, especially. I think he might be like the darling long shot this week that a lot of people like.
Yeah.
The prevailing trends will guide people that way. It almost reminds me of Wyndham when he won the U.S. Open and he opened at a really big number, and then everybody hopped on board and was like, "Yeah, he won a big event that comps well and he plays well in difficult conditions and he's long and you have to be long here." So he's just like, you go down the list of boxes to check. He's
Yeah.
finished 12th at the Masters, second at the PGA this year. And one of the best, I think he's like top 5, definitely top 10 in strokes gained at the US Open over the last 5 years. So
Yes.
super sneaky US Open guy. And is doing it with a combination of distance and accuracy that I love to see. I don't think he belongs at 100-1. I was there on him at Torrey for the Farmers earlier this year, so I love me some Harris English.
Didn't something weird happen at Wingfoot to him? Didn't he like lose his
Yes.
ball off the first? He was in it, right?
Yeah, I think that might have been the last. That might have been the final round. He hit a perfectly fine tee shot, and the rough was so ridiculous that none of the spotters could find the ball, and he had to re-tee. He missed the fairway by like 2 feet, and he had to
Harris
re-tee.
just went back. He was seemingly unbothered by it, if I remember right. Like
Yeah.
other players, it would have driven them like off the golf course, but he just kept plotting away.
Yes, I mean he's been a cheat code like placement bets and fantasy. You can get a good number on him again in fantasy. Like I'll keep going back to the Harris English. Well, he's so even keeled, like you said. I love him. I'm not really jumping on anybody else in this list. Shame on Sung Jae for what happened to his game. I don't know what's going on. Another miscut. That was my conviction bet of the week. Pendrith over Sung Jae. That was an easy sweat again. So wishing the best to Sung Jae, but the game is not there at the moment, unfortunately.
Not that they're gonna win the US Open at Oakmont, but do you like who's a long shot guy that you think like you would bet to outperform their expectation level?
Yeah, I'm going to give the same answer I've given the last like 3 or 4 years. Cameron Young.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's in contention again this week.
175-1. Yeah.
He was right there at Southern Hills at 300-1. I was on him then.
Yes.
Didn't make it into the playoffs. Should have. Looks good in Canada. Unfortunately, it's like everything but approach is good for him right now, and you just kind of like it's gotta click at some point. But of course, like this, you're not throwing darts at these greens. So if he's doing everything else well, especially putting, he's doing well, like the best putting year of his career. He's got the distance. Approach may not kill him so much here. He hasn't been like completely erratic with driver, especially these last 2 weeks. I will probably talk myself into him again. He'll probably be 200-1 somewhere, and that's enough for me to throw a few bucks on.
Okay. You'll probably get 200. You're right there. You're 175 right now. I like that pick. Yeah, it's tough for me. I still always want to believe in like Denny and Cameron Smith and my short game wizards that I think can linger if they have a pretty good off the tee week, although that seems to not happen quite as often. I kind of like a power guy potentially getting it right here. There's Ryan Fox, there's Taylor Pendrith who played really, TPC Toronto is been playing much easier, I think, today, but like 6 par 4s, I think over 480 yards. Like just in terms of the challenge, I think it's, it'll get guys ready for playing very challenging holes. It's in a different way, but I still think power is well suited. So those sort of guys, Nikolai Hogard as well as 150-1. Just some big numbers there at a couple of those guys. And then Bud Cauley's 200-1. I still have some interest in Bud. He qualified here the hard way after the Memorial with another good finish. Just a guy in really good form and confident. A couple of amateurs who played here when they had the amateur event who played pretty well that I just wanted to mention. Jacob Bridgman is 300-1, and Joe Highsmith, I think, advanced pretty far that year, 600-1. So not guys that are like ideal course fit, but Highsmith a winner, a PGA Tour winner in 2025. Colin Morikawa cannot say that.
Yeah.
Joe Highsmith can. So Interesting stuff, man. As always, anything you want to throw out before we get out of here? How fired up are you for Thursday morning Oakmont sighting?
Yeah, I mean, this is the tournament I get up the most for every year. In hindsight, I should have taken off like Thursday and Friday so I could really just soak in on this. But I'll be
Multitask, right?
I'll be
We'll
multitasking. I'll be multitasking. Yeah, no, I'm pumped. There's my preview article will be out on Sunday. The tournament sleeper picks will be up there. We'll have the pool strategy I usually tend to do and final bets, all the usual stuff on lineups.com. And yeah, I'm just excited. I hope we get, I don't know. Is that like, I'm kind of sick of Scotty like ho hum winning and like, okay, here's another
He's
like
not winning.
that
Scotty's
kind
not
of
winning.
that like annoyed me at the PGA Championship that he just like won and like went about his business. Like I want this to change somebody's life. I want this to be a life altering win, like we saw with like Harmon and Wyndham Clark, where we think of them differently. That could be the case for Vic or Cantlay. Could be the case for Joe Highsmith. You never know at the U.S. Open, so I'm excited to see it all play out.
Look, we're at the case where like the pendulum is like here with Scotty. He's so good, but it's too far, guys. It's too far. Look, plus 275. It's like the same price you could have got him at the Memorial.
Yeah.
With no Rory, with no Rahm, with no Bryson. So the three guys behind him on the board could have got the same odds at a tournament where he's a defending champion, which has more predictive in nature, which has less variables that could frustrate him, with a field half the size. Why would you bet the same price this week? Doesn't make any sense. We're going to take Bryson. Thank you, John, as always, for your help with this show. I hope that this was served as a worthy preview for the 125th U.S. Open Championship. On behalf of John Hasselbauer, my name is Joe Idoni. It's been a pleasure hosting Preferred Lines. If you want to subscribe to the channel on the way out, we would greatly appreciate it. We're here each and every Monday for you guys. Hope that you enjoyed the show. We'll catch you next time. Peace out, gang.